Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. A Labour report released by the Labour Bureau shows that while the economy is growing at 7%, jobs increased by 1.1% last year, which means that the government has been facing a growing employment crisis across the country. As per media reports, statistics from the government's Labour Bureau show that job growth plummeted in key sectors to its lowest levels in 8 years in calendar years 2015 and 2016 at 1.55 lakh and 2.31 lakh respectively, compared with a high of over 10 lakh new jobs created in 2009. One usually neglected aspect of India's unemployment crisis is of underemployment or concealed employment. This is of two types: not finding work for full year and work at very low wages. The Labour Bureau's 2016 report on unemployment paints a dire picture on both fronts. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will take a look at how dire the employment situation is in the country and how do we tackle the problem. Joining me on the program today are Santosh Mehrotra, Professor of Economics, JNU, and also Senior Fellow, Just Jobs Network. Also with me on the program, TK Arun, Editor Opinion, Economic Times, Amitava Guha, National Working Committee member, Centre of Indian Trade Unions, and Gopal Krishna Agarwal, National Spokesperson of the BJP. I'd like to start with you, Professor. Clearly, of course, the situation seems to be extremely dire, and unemployment is a problem that needs to be addressed at the earliest. And this is what the Labour report also points towards.
You're absolutely right. I mean, let's just put the numbers in perspective. First of all, unemployment has actually grown by 1.38 million, 13.8 lakhs per year. Because over that 4-year period from 12-13 to 16, we saw 20 million people joining the labor force, but only about 15 million got work, and so remaining were unemployed. The second is that, you see, in a preceding period from 2004-5 to 11-12, jobs in the non-agricultural sector were growing at 7.5 million per annum. In this period, in the most recent period, non-agricultural sectors added jobs only at the rate of about 2 million per annum, while at the same time the numbers joining the labor force has significantly increased. So it's critical that and these are young people who are better educated than earlier. So they're obviously looking for non-agricultural work. Agriculture has continued to lose workers. But because jobs were being created in non-agriculture earlier until about 11-12, about 5 million people were leaving agriculture per annum. But now the numbers in non-agriculture have not been increasing, so numbers leaving agriculture has dropped to about 1 million. And the other final issue that I want to raise is the quality of jobs. We've seen in the organized sector a significant increase in the share of contract workers as opposed to regular workers. And the very final point is this geographic distribution of the growth in jobs. It's all the jobs growth that has taken place is only concentrated in 2 southern states, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, 2 western states, Maharashtra and Gujarat, and then West Bengal and Haryana. The rest of the country has seen a significant decline in jobs, and these are the ones which are creating. So we've got a crisis across the board. And I think the most important point I would want to close with is that unlike in the earlier period, only 2 million, earlier period meaning 4-5 to 11-12, only 2 million youngsters were joining the labor force. Now about 5 million youngsters are joining the labor force every year. Right. So it's absolutely critical that job growth resumes, and that can happen only if we get much more real growth happening.
Sure. Talking about growth, TK Arun, the economy seems to be growing at over 7%, whereas job creation is stuck at 1.1%. Isn't there a correlation between economic growth and job creation? What's causing the problem?
The economy has been suffering from a paucity of investment. Investment as a proportion of GDP is down to 26.9%, the latest estimate. This is the lowest figure since 2004-5. This is an investment that actually creates jobs. It creates, basically a lot of construction jobs took place during the period when Dr. Mehrotra said you had fast growth. People who are moving from agriculture to construction of roads, of new residential localities, of new towns, and this is actually that was creating jobs. Now that kind of investment has come down drastically and can resume only after the bank's non-performing asset problem is sorted out. Once that happens and once banks start lending again on the scale on which they used to lend in the past, then we can hope to see a revival of investment and resultant job creation. Till then, you might see some growth here and there, but this is not giving the kind of momentum and dynamic impetus that job creation requires.
Sure. Gopal Krishna Agarwal, this is something that the government must be watching and observing extremely closely. This problem has been going on for the last 2 or 3 years now. What are the kind of initiatives that the government has taken so as to ensure that these jobs are created? What are the kind of initiatives that you're looking at as well?
No, there are two aspects to the whole problem. There is no question that there is a problem in the job market. We have to create much more jobs than what is being done at the present. And economic cycle is a cyclical issue. The growth has to lead through in demand has to come through more liquidity, and demand has to come through, it will create credit demand, so that more investment comes through. All these are cyclical issues, but ultimately the cycle will break only through growth. Growth will in itself create demand, demand in itself will create demand for a credit, and then investment will pick up, and when manufacturing takes place, then the job sector will improve. There is a limitation on which the government can provide jobs through the government services. Ultimately either entrepreneurship is generated or private sector comes through more investment. So these are the two important aspects which are very clearly identified. And the third was the agriculture sector or informal sector, which was employing lot many people, are fully data is not captured in the job market or NSSO data or other things. Those issues are also there, but ultimately there is underemployment, disguised employment that will take place in these sectors. So government is doing, there are several schemes where the government is doing, so that whether it is for skill development, whether it is for startup, stand up, ultimately our focus is to create entrepreneurship. That alone will create job in the private sector. Secondly is to create demand through government investment, and there is a time gap on which this can take place. Agriculture sector is being focused for doubling of the income. There is a lot of work on the skill development side. Government has a separate ministry has been set up. There is a gap, filling of the gap between what is requirement of the industry and how skilled people are. So these are also being filled up through courses, through this centers from the skill development. Even PSUs are taking up this skill development program under the CSR issues.
Right.
So I think there are some sectors which only will create demand in the future. Construction sector or real estate had a big backdrop where it was not properly developing. Now I think with RERA and this issue, the construction sector, which employs a lot many people, will create more jobs.
Okay.
And in IT and other higher end there is a question of technology. Services industry was employing lot many people, but with the advent of new technology, there are technologies where human resources are being reduced with artificial intelligence issues coming up, and it's a global phenomenon.
Automation is causing this, is what you're saying.
Domestic market will grow when our informal economy will come into more into formal economy. That government is planning through demonetization, sure. GST, skill
Fair
development, mudra loans. Around 4 crore mudra loans have been given. So it's a cumulative effect which the government is trying to create. And now the major focus this year, the government has said now that macroeconomic parameters are in place, and NPA problem of the banking sector
sure.
is under control, so that credit uptake will take.
You've listed several of the initiatives that the government has taken and what the government's priorities are going into the future. Amitava Guha, haven't these initiatives worked, or do you believe that if these initiatives were not in place, the situation would have been far more dire?
No, first of all, let me tell you that in this data, in this information on the report, I think it doesn't contain two areas. One is that the threat IT area is suffering now. It has been stated that already it has happened, that 18,000 people in one organization has been retrenched, and there is a threat of 56,000 people will lose their job within 6 months. It's a very serious issue. This, I don't think it has been covered in this report. Second thing is that the effect of the demonetization. The report says that during October 2016 and January, there has been 1.52 lakh casual and 46,000 part-time job are lost. This is a very important factor. It has not been considered, that these things. Then most of all, the thing is that the government may think about, or government has to think about creation of job, about more entrepreneurship, etc., etc. But then the philosophy, if we follow, that there will be jobless growth, this is by and large is still followed. If there is a jobless growth, then where will be the employment? And virtually it is happening. A high amount of automation, etc., etc., and ignoring the SME sectors, then that has created a problem, because SME sectors is still a very considerable amount of jobs are available. They are non-formal, maybe, but there are jobs. So therefore, if this is not attended, if the, well, you can create Make in India situation, you can develop some entrepreneurs, all these things, but then today's situation, if it is not job intensive, labor intensive, and fully dependent on the jobless growth philosophy, then you cannot expect the employment.
Right.
The basic thing, again, if you go back to the Keynesian theory, the long back age-old thing, that you should provide money to the people so that the purchasing capacity comes up. Thereby the demands will come. Demands will not come from market, demands will come from the purchasers. If the purchasing capacity is increased, government should think in that way. Give more to the workers, give more to the peasantry, so that they develop a purchasing capacity, they generate a market, and China has done it. In China, what has happened? They have shifted from export dependency whole and soul to generate their own market. They are enhancing the income of their own population, workers and peasants. That should the policy government should take. But the now policy which is followed, it is totally reverse. Therefore, it is very serious thing. Government should think about it.
Mr. Agarwal, you want to say something? Yeah.
I just want to say the problem areas with regard to jobs are very clear. They are very obvious that IT sector is facing a problem because of upgradation of technology. There are so many issues where high-end technology is entering into the IT sector that the government cannot do on that issue. But ultimately, the government can create job in MSME, that has been mentioned. And our focus is on MSME sector. Manufacturing is one area where job can come out. And investment, as I said, investment is being driven. Credit is being made available. Interest are being kept at low end. Government is spending on infrastructure. So this whole will push the cycle towards the growth, and that is where it can come ultimately.
Okay, sure. TK Arun, this point about growth has been stressed upon over the last 10 minutes or so, and something that the Chief Economic Advisor Arvind Subramaniam also mentioned last week. He said that we need to push for higher growth. We need to achieve growth in the range of 8 to 10%, and that will automatically solve the problem of jobless growth. Do you agree with that?
That is an economist's standard answer. Of course, naturally, if there is growth, ultimately there will be job creation and people will find jobs. But how does growth take place? For that, we come back to the same. India is a country that desperately needs to urbanize. The National Institute of Advanced Study in Bangalore has a report which talks about a mismatch between the demand for skills and the demand for jobs. A lot of job creation is actually happening in agriculture, in rural areas. It cites the example of the number of districts where agriculture employing primarily agricultural labor rather than people doing self-cultivation is increasing, which means more and more jobs are being created in the rural sector. Now, are skills being generated to make these people more productive, which will create more income and which will actually lead to more purchasing power in the hands of the people and general demand in the economy. That is not happening. the skill development is all oriented towards urban jobs in the services and industrial sectors, which is of course necessary, but there could be a spatial mismatch between where you are trying to train people and where people require to be trained. That is one factor. But ultimately, India needs to urbanize. As we have said in the past, if India is to become 50% urban over the next 20 years, that means some 25 crore people moving from village to town. These people need a physical urban environment on which to live, which means you have to build some 20,000 square kilometers of additional urban space. This is urbanization. You need to plan that, you need to build it, and this will generate huge amount of jobs directly in the construction and indirectly in supplying the materials for the construction, materials for the homes, in servicing the people who live there, and all these. So there is actually no dearth of growth opportunities. So we need to invest in basic infrastructure.
Right.
We need to invest in healthcare and education. That investment in turn will empower people to take up opportunities as they come before them, to recognize them and then take them up, and also create new jobs into which people will move in. So the situation, let me just tell one point.
Yeah.
How are people affording to stay unemployed? We must think about that. Let me tell you, 40 years ago, if you are unemployed, in most parts of the country, you are dead. So you cannot afford to withdraw from the labor force saying, look, I don't want to do this work, I am unemployed. Because when you live on the margins of subsistence, you cannot withhold your labor. You have to work at whatever rate is available.
Right.
But today our economy has prospered. There is some, food is available cheap through various schemes initiated by various governments. There is some amount of social security. So people are actually able to stay unemployed. That is also a strength to the resilience of the system. You must recognize that.
Sure.
So while this is happening, the main thing is to do is step up the level of investment in the economy, create infrastructure, and build the growth and jobs that we need.
Sure. Yeah. You you wanted to add something to that?
No, obviously. Look, there is a big difference, the three big differences in a sense between a period that I was talking about earlier, between 2004-05 and 11-12 and post 11-12 are, one, that in that previous period, both private investment as well as public investment was taking place. We've already agreed that private investment has practically collapsed,
yes,
right? I mean, in the year 2007-08, which is the peak year of, we were investing 39%, 38% of GDP. We are now at 26% of GDP. Why was this the case? Both public and private investment was good. In the last 2 to 3 years, even public investment has not been very strong. However, in the last year, public investment has truly picked up in infrastructure, both from the Surface Transport Ministry, but even more importantly in the Rural Development Ministry. So let me just say a few words about this. In the first 2 years of this government, many projects were stalled, and they were de-stalled by the Surface Transport Ministry, as a result of which, major projects began to receive money. The other thing that happened was the rural housing program, the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. So the objective there is that we will build about 33 lakhs rural houses per annum over, these next 2 years, including this financial year which has just gone. That means 1 crore of houses in rural areas, for which money, public money has already been allocated.
Right.
The other thing is that PMGSY, Pradhan Mantri Gramin Sadak Yojana, that has already seen a significant injection of funds for rural roads in this past financial year, and in the next 2 financial years of this government, I think that money has been assured. So we are seeing, and we will see, an increase in the number of kilometers of rural roads per day that were being built, increasing very significantly. I mean, in the last year of the UPA, it was about 70 kilometers. It's now ramped up to about 130 kilometers. So as a result of this, construction employment will get generated. So wages so more wages will be there, and therefore there'll be using the Keynesian term, there'll be an acceleration phenomenon, which is what other speakers have been talking about. In other words, consumer demand increases. As consumer demand increases, jobs will grow. But there's still a problem, as I think other speakers have rightly pointed out. Private investment is not growing.
Right.
Now, and yet we are seeing an increase in growth. We are seeing growth. So we have to explain how is it that growth is happening, but it's jobless. Growth is happening for two sets of reasons. You see, what we saw was that about 3 years ago, oil prices, 4 years ago, oil prices were in the region of $150 a barrel. They are now down to $50 to $60 a barrel. So input costs for all kinds of activities, non-agricultural, agricultural, have significantly declined. It's not that firms have reduced their prices. So, in other words, revenues have remained roughly the same, input costs have fallen, so the difference between the two are showing up as profits, and those profits are showing up in GDP.
Sure.
Reason one. Reason two is that import costs have fallen because 80% of our oil is imported.
Right.
Oil prices have fallen, so import costs have fallen. Our exports have not been increasing, they've been so the difference between exports and imports has grown, and that's showing up in GDP also. So you're seeing GDP increase, but it's not a real increase. It's because
it's an artificial increase.
It's an artificial increase.
Okay. Yeah.
This is the issue.
Yeah.
I want to add one more dimension on the debate.
Before that, let Mr. Goa make his point, and then you can respond to both of them.
No, but if you may continue.
Okay, please.
So I want to add one more dimension in this debate is that there is no extremely direct relation between growth and employment, because ultimately growth has to lead through demand also is required for growth to translate into jobs and other things. But what we have seen over the last several years is there was growth, but there was a concentration of wealth. For demand, the growth to lead to demand in the economy, it is that there is a proper distribution channel. If you see, our focus on last 3 years was whether it was Jan Dhan, direct benefit transfer, or other things, transparency in distribution channels through Narega or whatever was there, that was to create a proper distribution mechanism, transparent, corruption free, and where a large portion of weaker and sections of the remote sections of the population get into the distribution network. That is very important. So now I think the growth will be properly distributed. That is very important. Otherwise, there was we see the global wealth report.
Otherwise, the rich will keep getting richer and the poor will keep getting poorer. Is what you're saying.
The growth did not lead to that demand in the economy. And another important aspect, in addition to what people have said, growth we do not link only to the profitability of company. Actually, it is the GDP in real terms also is an important. And there was an excess capacity why investment was not taking place. Now, if you go for a survey to the private sector industry, is that they are saying that at present government demand has sucked the excess capacity that they are having, and with the NPA problem with the banks now being under control, though not solved fully, but under control, so they are also ready to credit. So both these things, that excess capacity of the private sector is now sufficiently absorbed, credit availability that banks are ready to give credit, and then distribution channel, it will, I think, will fastly lead into job creation.
Yes, Mr. Goa.
I need to point out a couple of issues. For example, that we have seen that on public sectors, there are still a very large sector, large employees, but public sectors are in danger. Now, disinvestment has been forced on them. Therefore, and many more public sectors are going to be privatized. That's our problem. And in private sector, as soon as it becomes privatized, then the employment question comes. There will be huge number of redundancy. And similarly, as has been said, that social security measures are also suffering. For example, you look at the budget. Total Narega investment is reduced, and huge number of unpaid Narega workers are moving around. And many places it has not been. What is the rate of utilization of this Narega scheme? Not more than 30%. So therefore, social sector, for example, another schemes. Now there was maternity schemes. Yeah? 2013 law, it says that 6,000 rupees benefit has to be given. Now the government has reduced it to 5,000 rupees, and that too for one child. These are the two decisions are against the 2013 Act. So social security sector also, there is a severe pruning the benefits, and existing benefits are now being narrowed down. Later on, it's expanding it.
Right.
So that will have an effect on the total employment.
Sure.
And therefore, the issues which we need to take up, for example, import-export, the balance of trade is also a serious concern. You say about your current account deficit, it is generated from there. Import is also increased, or in comparison to that, export has not increased much.
Sure.
And
I've got very little time, so I'm going to cut you short there, unfortunately. TK Arun, very quickly, what are the sectors to look out for? Where are the jobs really going to come from?
If urbanization is one huge area which will generate jobs, but that will happen only if you relieve the banks of their bad debt problem. Without that, you cannot have large-scale investment in the economy. Healthcare, education, these are both areas which require large amounts of manpower and direly required by the economy to equip the manpower to do productive work. And IT, etc., they do not employ many people directly, but indirect employment is higher.
Sure.
And it's not really correct to say that IT sector is losing jobs. In the net, they are still generating jobs. But many people are moving from unorganized sectors to organized sectors. For example, in organized retail, e-commerce requires large number of people to be the delivery jobs. So logistics is seeing a lot of employment generation. So these are sectors that will create jobs.
That we need, that we need to look out for. Professor, close the show for us with a concluding remark in 15 seconds. You don't have more time than that.
I think going forward, we don't just have to create more jobs. We have to make sure that social security is introduced. The Ministry of Labour is working on it. For the unorganized sector, it can be done. We can't just live on just jobs. They have to be just jobs.
Okay, they have to be just jobs is what you're saying. On that note, we'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Santosh Kumar Mehrotra, TK Arun, Amitava Guha and Gopal Krishna Agarwal. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have today. See you again next time.